Hey, this is Peyton Jones. I'm sitting here with Jeff Vanderstelt of Soma Communities. Jeff, it is an honor to be here with you right now. So come on, boom. All right.
Thanks, man. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. So, Jeff, you guys kind of blew up. I mean, Soma Communities is I don't know how to put it, but you guys kind of put missional community on the map. I know you're not going to agree with that, but missional community is being talked about in small circles. And I first, about 2.5, almost 3 years ago, came into contact with a video from the Resurgence where it profiled, I think it was called What Is or Who Is Soma Community? Mm-hmm. And it just had you walking down some of the streets, talking with some of the people, interviewing your office, mm-hmm. and it blew my mind. And I know it blew other people's mind. People really connected with this kind of organic way of doing church. And we were invited to look over your shoulder at Soma Community and see how you're doing. And for Church Planter Magazine this month, for this issue, it's our first feature issue where we are featuring a particular movement or a particular church, trying to get their philosophy, introduce all church planners about what it is that makes you tick, what your passions are, what your distinctives are. So that's what we're here to talk about. Jeff, I was wondering if you could share with us some of your story, kind of your background, and mm-hmm. how'd you get involved in this crazy thing called church planting?
All right. Yeah, it started way back in youth ministry. I served in 3 different churches as a youth pastor. The last one was at Willow Creek, and in each situation, I saw a common theme. We really believe that students could be the church, that they didn't grow up to be leaders in the church, but as soon as they came to faith in Jesus, they were the church. They were called to the mission of making disciples who make disciples. They were supposed to do it in normal, everyday stuff of life, and so we just trained students. Instead of putting on lots of programs for them, we thought, let's train them how to do it. And what we kept seeing happen is they would graduate out of high school into the church, and the church would then basically put them back in their seat. And so watching that over and over and over again, and even going to a church that's great with evangelism and leadership development like Willow Creek, we were moving more and more towards releasing kids, training them, equipping them, and of course we did amazing programs there, but we wanted to see our students out on mission in everyday life, and they let us do that. So we had kind of still a weekly program, and we did programming great, but we started these things called house groups, and we had 27 of them. They were connected to key campus ministries. They were trying to reach out to their high school campus, led by parents, students, and adults all together, and it was just so fruitful. We saw kids learn how to do ministry, lead their peers to faith, lead their friends in how to study the Bible, saw kids really take ownership of the church, and our ministry just grew like 3 times the size through that kind of work. And we saw kids just get excited about being a part of God's mission on the planet. And then again, I saw the kids just kind of graduate, and once again, it just seemed like it didn't have a place to go. There wasn't a heartbeat like, let's start churches with these 27 groups. And they really were the beginning of what could have been church plants. Yeah. And they were excited, and they were prepared, and they had parents involved. I mean, it could have been a really great movement, I think, of God in that time. And so I through that time just kept saying, I don't think until the church actually says we believe the church should be leaving instead of staying, that we're ever going to see a movement of God.
Yeah, it's funny. You and I were talking before this interview about many churches want to do ministry outside the 4 walls so that they can cause things to become more centralized. They can hook more people back in. But what you were actually doing in that church is you were taking people that were centralizing, you were decentralizing them by decentralizing and motivating youth. Yeah. Who often are entertained rather than motivated. You got them out there. You made them missionaries mm-hmm. in Chicago, in their city, and then they began to reach more people. And I know Soma Communities is that's been your model with Soma Communities.
Yeah, so when I resigned from Willow, I honestly didn't know if there was a place for me in the church, because I knew that my call was to help equip and send people to leave, not just stay. And I just didn't know if any church wanted that. And so I thought, well, I'll go back and follow my business major. That's what I went to school for originally. I'll start some companies. We'll do ministry through business. And that was what I thought when I resigned. I was done with any kind of vocational church position. Okay. And thought, I'm going in the business world. I saw that a lot of business people didn't have a clue how to see that as mission, so thought, well, that's what God's going to call me to do. Sure enough, the day I resigned, nobody knows I've resigned. It hasn't gone public. I get 3 calls, all from church planting organizations, asked if I'd consider being a church planter and if I'd be willing to leave Willow to plant churches. I said, well, I just resigned. Maybe God's saying something. And it was all in the same day. And that's when I thought, well, maybe I am supposed to help businessmen learn how to be the church, but it's still with the church.
Sure.
Equipping them and teaching them. And that was what led me back to the Northwest to start Soma. And the vision there was, what if we could train people to see all of life as ministry and everyone as a missionary, and train them in such a way that if they went to any other place in the world, they would be able to keep doing this. So it needed to be transferable, reproducible, and sustainable, not primarily dependent upon a centralized gathering to pull it off. So that's what was in the very DNA of how we started Soma. And I didn't know what that looked like, honestly. I knew that was kind of an impulse I had as I looked at the scriptures. I saw that's what I read, which is what I saw they did. I got connected to books like Missional Church by Gooder and started reading Newbigin and a bunch of other people that, you know,
did. That's
great
pretty highbrow church planter stuff. If you really want to be refined and cultured, you read Newbigin.
That's right. If you can get through it. Some people don't like to get through it. So, I mean, I just started kind of cutting my teeth on what does missional mean. I didn't really know, but I knew that I'd been doing it with students. And so I'd already been doing something I didn't really have language for, and now I was working on how do I frame up a church so everybody gets it, so it doesn't become a program of the church or an extracurricular event or things that we send some people to do, but what if everybody was a missionary in the church?
I'm laughing because I was telling you, I was confessing that on many of my jogs, you know, I'm listening to either you or Caesar, right, from the back in the day.
Yeah.
And what was funny is I can remember at one point, I'm smiling because I remember you saying that at that time, whatever year it was that I was listening to, your missional community, I think you said, me and my wife are the only believers. And so you have learned to get involved in the community in a way that's really, although we talk about missional community, it is still attractional, because what you're doing, you use the term living life with people, sharing your life. And I know that you'll say, oh, I didn't invent that term. I didn't. But like I said, Soma really connected with people because it was a decentralized network, and it was very empowering. Other guys, Dave Ferguson, Hugh Halt, I mean, a lot of guys, Alan, you know, a lot of guys talk like this, but I really think that God used you to kind of, like I said, that movie, we peeked over your shoulder. We actually got to see what it looked like. And there was something really attractive about sitting in someone's living room, having a glass of wine, being able to interact and discuss. And tell me what your missional community looks like, filled with non-believers.
Yeah, and before we do that, because I think what I want to make sure that you hear and what others get to hear from this is, I think the reason why people liked what they saw is because they saw themselves in it. They could see themselves living this out. It was no longer like, oh, like, gosh, this is impressive. I mean, what an incredible communicator he must be, or what great programming they've got, whatever. It was just like, okay, these are just normal people.
It's just Jeff sitting there in the room.
That's right.
You know,
it seems like they're just eating together,
kids,
they're partying together, they're working on a community garden together, their kids are running around. This looks like normal life. And I think what by God's grace we were able to capture was, what does normal life look like with gospel intentionality? You know, what does it look like to see life as mission instead of creating a program that is missional? Yeah. And I think that's the difference. When you have to create programs to be on mission instead of going, no, life is the program, now let's train people how to engage it with gospel intentionality as his missionary people, then everybody can do it. And I think that's why people connected so well to it. Now, our missional community, I mean, I've been through so many iterations of my missional community. Right now, the one I'm in is, I'd have to say it's not the best. It's gone through seasons. You know, we've had the one that you heard about and all those recordings. It was pretty much Janie and I and a bunch of unbelievers, and those people have now come to faith. You know, and so some of them are doing well. Some of them we sent out to start new missional communities.
Awesome.
And so, you know, I've had 15 missional communities come out of our one missional community since you probably started listening to that. What I have right now is a group of people who, they kind of need a good kick in the pants out of the nest, and we need to get started again. So that's the reality of mission, is sometimes you go through seasons where you're like, okay, we got a lot of unhealthy people, a lot of people that maybe aren't that serious about getting on mission. So what do you do with that? Well, we try to reform our groups every single year. Okay, who are we going to reach? How are we going to reach them? Do you still want to be a part of this, or is it time for you to move on?
Yeah.
And giving people that option to opt out or to be sent out allows us to keep the fluidity of mission going. Whereas I think sometimes churches are just okay just saying, well, we're just going to keep everybody happy. And, you know, and I know none of you want to be on mission and making disciples, so we'll be okay with that. No, man. Like, we gotta do good work of discipling, which includes discipline.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means hard words or making hard decisions and moving on if we have to at times.
Yeah.
So.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that this model was laid down in the New Testament.
Yeah.
It's not the only model in the New Testament, but it's definitely a model laid down that is there very strongly. When I was we were interviewing. I don't know if you know about Pastor Saeed, and we were interviewing his sister, who is actually not many people know. She's like the crazy evangelist of that church, which is an underground church.
Wow.
It's a house church, and I asked her, how big is that church? And she said it's about 2,000 people that meet in groups of 10 to 20.
Wow.
And they have to pretend it's birthday parties, and it has to move each and every week. And so when for me, because I'm always thinking international context, what I love is, of course, we talked about, you know, I know Steve, and we worked with Steve in Wales, and he's up to about 1,000, you know. But I mean, what's brilliant about this model is it's so sustainable because it doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take anything other than what we're commanded to do. Discipleship's the hot buzzword. I mean, it is. It's the freaky, slippy buzzword that everyone wants to talk about. But it's hardwired. It has to be hardwired. What does that look like? What is the discipleship process? And you hit on it earlier, like the ministry retraining. What is the discipleship and ministry training look like for you in Soma Communities?
Well, we believe that you have to, first of all, define a disciple. So that's really important. A lot of people don't take time to even define what that is. So for us, discipleship is increasingly bringing all of life under the lordship of Jesus Christ.
Good definition.
A disciple is one who is increasingly worshiping Jesus in all of life, being changed by Jesus in all of life, and learning how to obey Jesus in all of life, and then teach others to do the same. So it's worship, being changed by, obeying, and teaching others to do the same. So I think getting your definition is real important, and because then you say, well, then what kind of context or environment do you need to create a disciple-making environment? Well, if it's all of life, then I need to think of discipleship and disciples being made in all of life. So we've got to have life on life in order for discipleship to be accomplished in all of life.
Awesome.
So it's a life on life thing, and we usually say that means it has to be visible and accessible. You need to be able to see each other's lives in all the facets, and they need to be able to see yours. Marriage, relationships, work, play, the whole deal, how they deal with their kids, how they deal with their neighbors. Like, you don't really know what they believe until you see them in life, living out what they say they believe. So life on life, life in community, because one-on-one discipleship makes them look like you, but community discipleship makes them look like Jesus.
Right.
Because one person can't show the fullness of Christ. So we do that. It has to be in community. So all of discipleship has to happen with lots of people in your life speaking into it. And then the third is life on mission, because you don't know how to make disciples unless you're on the mission of making disciples. So we have to have life on life, life in community, life on mission. And then in that, we expect everyone to grow in gospel fluency, which means they learn how to apply the truths of Jesus' life, death, resurrection, ascension to all the stuff of life. And so they learn how to speak it to all of life. So they learn gospel fluency. They learn their new gospel identity, which we look at a baptismal identity. You've been baptized in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So in the name of the Father, now you're his family. So we learn how to love one another like family.
Right.
Baptized in the Son, he's king, therefore we're his servants. So as he served the least of these, which is us, now we serve the least of these as we serve Jesus. So love like family, serve the least of these because you're servants. And then we've been baptized in the name of the Spirit. And the reason you're given the Spirit is to be God's witness people, as missionary people to the world. So we're a missionary people sent to make disciples who make disciples. So establish them as a family of missionary servants, sent as disciples who make disciples. You do that life on life, life in community, life on mission. So that's pretty much our paradigm for discipleship is Do they know the gospel? Do they know how to apply it to all of life? And do they know their new identity? And do they live in light of that new identity?
Awesome.
So that's pretty much what we're training everybody. And then that then works itself out in just normal rhythms of life. So instead of going, we want them just to learn how to be a good church member and attender and study their Bible and pray, we're saying, no, we want eating and playing and celebrating and recreating and work, all those things to be impacted by the truths of the gospel in such a way that if they were going to go be a missionary people in any context, they would engage in those rhythms with gospel intentionality as disciple makers. Right. So now they know, okay, if we're going to reach the football team, that means we're at football practices, we're at games, we're helping out with snacks. We're learning how to be missionaries in the football context. Yeah. If it's arts, we're going to hang out at shows and whatever it may be. So we teach them now how to apply that in the rhythms of life in the context they're on mission to.
Right.
So that's pretty much the whole of our discipleship strategy, is teaching them that whole concept.
That's
and then we want them to learn it in such a way that they could go to any place in any part of the world and do it again.
That's one of the keys. Like as you're talking, what I'm sure people are picking up on, and you definitely get this from your training, like Soma Basics. When you said gospel fluency, my mind immediately went back to Soma Basics.
Yeah.
These are terms that you embed into your people. You're kind of, in a way, you're unprogramming them, you're deprogramming, and you're reprogramming them.
Yeah.
You're rewriting the gospel, hardwiring it into them.
Yeah.
And what I love about what you guys have done is it's so transferable. So you can take those things. It's very apparent that you've thought through these concepts. You've thought deeply. You've thought critically about these things, and you've made it transferable. One of the biggest pitfalls that church planners get into is they have a vision, but they don't know how to transfer that vision. It's not communicable. It's not transferable. It's one of the things that Soma, I believe, one of the reasons it really caught fire is because you guys were so precise. You had defined things. I've never heard that breakdown of the baptism of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I'm just drinking that in as I hear it. But it's come out of you guys. It's very pastoral.
Yeah.
I'm hearing your pastor heart kind of coming through, that I want people to understand what this life is going to be, and then you've made it transferable. So that's just amazing.
Well, I think part of our job, if we're going to have anything be much more movement-like, is to make it so that it can be easily transferred. Yeah. And in order to do that, you have to reduce it to the non-reducibles. And I think that's part of, like, really apostolic ministry in some ways, is going, what is it that's going to be left when we reduce it down? And every time I'm with church planners, they're all trying to be cool and hip and come up with new language. And I'll sit down with them and go, do you want this to be one church or many churches? Because if you want it to be many churches, you can't be the language you prefer over everybody else.
That's right.
It can't be the language that won't go to any other culture. So if you just want to plant a church, make it cool and hip for Portland with its unique language and look and feel and all that. That's great. But those people won't be able to leave Portland and go do it.
That's right.
So we've got to then reduce it to what are the things they could take to another context. And I think that's the job that the church has got to get on, because we're making it so unique to our own gifts and abilities and context that you can't go anywhere with it.
Well, and that's you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the apostolic aspect. I mean, I definitely see you as an apostolic leader. You're a motivator. You train people up. It's more about you said it's more about movement, and so for you, that's more your heart. And can you kind of there had to be, the theme of this conference is disciple shift. There had to be a shift in your thinking. How did I know it happened with the youth at one point, but can you go back to some key things that kind of changed your way, or was it always there from the time you're saved? You saw that, hey, something might be kind of wrong with the system here, and I feel like God wants to do this, or where did the kind of empire building that might have been in your heart, because it was definitely in mine at one point in ministry, may not have been in yours, but at what point did you feel you were either influenced or radically changed from the inside to be a kingdom expander rather than an empire builder?
Yeah, I think when I was 16, I had an older man come up to me and say I was called to be a pastor, and all I knew of a pastor was a guy who sits in an office 40 hours a week writing sermons and then getting up on Sunday and preaching a message. And I thought, that's the last thing I want to do, because I'd want to do something that's going to have more impact than that.
Yeah.
And so I just said no to it. And I was always bucking against what I saw. It just seemed like church didn't have any relevance for most of my life. And I think that made me, and in a lot of ways I started to walk away from it, because I'm like, I don't get it. Like, it feels like just a legalistic game that we're playing. Like, you just figure out how to fit in and play the part and act like you got it together, but all week long we're all a mess and nobody's willing to talk about that.
Yeah.
So I think that was going on, and I was always the one, kind of pulling back the wool, going like, "Do you guys see what's going on?" And of course, I was seen as a rebel because of that. Of course. And so I was going like, "Okay, I'm going to go into business." My first business I started when I was 8 years old, and I just started.
What was your business?
I sold worms to fishermen.
So you were like a young Gary Vaynerchuk.
That's right. So I did. I started my own lawn care. I had all these businesses all the way up till I was older, and
I love it.
And so that was already in me. Went to school for business.
Yeah. So you had an entrepreneurial.
I had an
spirit.
entrepreneurial spirit, absolutely.
So Jeff, I got to ask you, if we didn't know Jeff Vanderstelt as Soma Communities, what would Jeff be doing today? What businesses did you almost start up?
Oh gosh. I don't know.
Would you be like some shark somewhere, like running some casino,
it might have been really bad. Yeah. I don't know if you want to talk about what I would have done, because that was probably before the redeemed part of me. So God rescued me from a lot of stuff.
That's awesome.
But I think, so I add that to, my parents were extremely hospitable. House was always open. People were always over. Kids, adults, we were open in our home when people needed a place to live. I would move out of my bedroom to give my room up. This is just normal for my life.
Yeah.
And yet, a point came, and this was back when I was at Willow, I was going through just a stirring, like something's wrong with the church. I don't know what it is. I couldn't put my finger on it. And as I was in that struggle, I was with my dad. We were out fishing, and we were talking about what he was going through. And he said, Jeff, we hired a new discipleship pastor at our church because none of us know how to make disciples. And I said, Dad, you've been in the church 50 years. How is it you don't know how to make a disciple? And I said, and why would you hire a discipleship pastor? Like, discipleship isn't a program of the church. It's the whole point of the entire church.
Yeah, amen.
So if your pastor is leading the church, doesn't know how to make disciples, why'd you hire another one? Why don't you just get rid of him and get a new pastor?
Yeah.
That can train you. And he's like, those are all good questions, and I just started peppering him with it. And it dawned on me. I started thinking back, like, wait a minute. My parents don't know how to make disciples. I lived in their house and watched unbelievers come to faith in the middle of our house and watched them understand what it meant to follow Jesus. My dad wasn't real articulate, kind of blue-collar businessman, but he knew how to share Jesus with people. And he knew how to show what Jesus was like in our home. Awesome. And it dawned on me, nobody affirmed the work of the ministry my parents were doing. My dad was a businessman, used business as ministry, and used his house as a place of hospitality. And I thought, he's been doing disciple making for years. No one just ever told him that's what it was.
The roots of Soma Community,
and
right
seriously,
there.
That was a big
awesome.
moment, because then I'm like, how many other hundreds or thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people are involved in the church, and no one's ever validated their ministry, which is very different than what we might do on Sunday, because we've said that's the only way church should get done. So I think that was the seminal moment that kind of kicked it off for me. And then I started thinking, what if we could begin to lead a church in such a way that my dad would count? That someone like him would actually be counted in as a missionary.
That's so cool.
So I think that's where it shifted for me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And it's funny because that leads me to when I thought of all the questions I was going to ask you today, again, my mind went back to that movie. And
which, by the way, Austin Stone came and lived with us for 10 days, their camera crew, and shot that whole thing. So they were with us for 10 days capturing our life.
No kidding.
And how that came about was Michael Stewart, who was part of Austin Stone, who we call the mad scientist because he's always like building up a whole new crazy concoction. But he had called me while I was on the road to a missional community that I was going to go train out an hour and a half from where I live that was starting their own mission in another place. And on the road, he calls me, he says, I don't know what's going on, Jeff, but your name has been given to me, and I've been hearing about you, and we're thinking about changing our whole church towards missional community, and we're told that you're the guy I need to talk to. So we talked for 30 or 40 minutes, and that began a relationship where then they just kept calling me in, and then they brought me to the Verge, and it seems like I'm kind of one of the poster boys at Verge Conference.
That's awesome.
But that's how it all started, was they really just said, we want to tell the story. And they were gracious to just make that available for everybody.
Well, my mind goes back to, and that's cool they made that, because that was pretty prophetic. I think that was a movie that needed to be made. And I remember seeing that movie and wondering, how come there aren't a bunch of those? I thought it was going to be a series. Like, who is, then we'd see another one. So, but the cool thing that came across, how like when you're hanging out with or somebody's talking, suddenly they cry, like in your missional community.
Yeah.
And there was like this kind of like, whoa, everyone suddenly, like, you can feel it in the air. Everyone's like, everyone leans in slightly, like, and people are uncomfortable, but it's serious. It's a somber moment.
Yeah.
And I think most people watching that video just saw your heart for the lost people of Tucson. Like, I'm getting emotional now just thinking, I wept with you, man, when I saw that. Like, if Jeff Vanderstelt can cry, dang it, I can cry too. But I did. I wept. And part of my heart was weeping, like, do I love my community that much? And it was just, when I thought of all the questions I could ask you, my question, and I don't know if you can answer it. I think you partially answered it with talking about your dad and the home you grew up in, but how does where did Jeff Vanderstelt get the heart? And I know what you're going to say, but where did he get the heart for his community?
Well, I guess it starts with the fact that when I was 8, I prayed a prayer. And it was largely because I didn't want to go to hell.
Yeah. What was your church background, real quick?
Evangelical Free Church.
Oh, EV Free.
Yeah, in Michigan, and it was a good church.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
But I don't know that I ever was regenerate.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So I lived this dual life, and I didn't see any significance for Jesus in my life, and I lived a very, very sick life, man. Lots of junk in my life.
Sure.
And when I was 21, I was living in Spain studying, and Jesus showed up, man. I mean, it was one of those moments where I came home from a bunch of crazy partying, and my mom had taught me to read my Bible every night. So I'd come home and I'd read it. It didn't matter if it was 3 a.m, I'd open it up and read it.
Sounds like Pete.
So I'm reading it, and I got my journal there, and as I'm reading, and I wasn't, I hadn't had too much to drink. I was sober, but I was reading it, and in that moment, I heard him say, "You never gave me your life. You gave me your afterlife. I want your life. Give me your life right now.
Wow.
I love you, even though you've rebelled against me and done all these horrible things. I have never given up on you." And I got on my knees and I surrendered my life to Jesus. And from that, and I just said, "I'll do anything you want me to do." I have no idea what that is. And from that moment on, he just led me. He told me what to do, and he's continued to do that. And I think what motivates me is the fact that I'm the last person that should get to do this.
Amen.
And I'm humbled that God would come and rescue me from my sin. And I owe him my life, and it's not because I have to, it's because I get to, and I love him like crazy.
Amen.
And so when I think of people in our city who don't know that breaks my heart.
Yeah, man.
So that's what motivates me, because
awesome.
I know his love, and I know they don't.
Yeah, it's funny because as I'm hearing your testimony, it takes my mind back to like George Whitefield, that desperation until he found the gospel. Always people God uses. John Bunyan, 18 months, man, just envying the geese in the field, like all the Spurgeon, all of these great men that we look at as soul winners that are passionate for the gospel, and it comes from.
Oh, it's deep within, man.
Amen.
My brother came to me after I came to faith, and I was in pastoral ministry, and he said, "I'm so angry at you. I hate you." I said, "Why?" He goes, "You're the biggest fraud. You're the last person who should get to do this."
Wow.
He goes, "Why would you get to do this?" And I said,
Wow.
"Only because of God's grace." And I'll never forget that, because that's.
Was he your older brother?
He's younger. He was looking up to me, and he said, "I had front seat to your life, and I know what your life was like."
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah. So.
I was just going to call you the prodigal. That's all.
Well, I have an older brother who I think has that problem. Who thinks that of me, too. He just didn't say it.
That's awesome.
My whole family thought that of me.
Has
kid.
your dad been able to see Soma?
Yeah, they're living with
Awesome.
us for a couple months right now, helping out with one of our missional communities. There's
That is so cool.
whole missional community devoted to reaching out to a football team, a high school football team, because 85% of the kids on the team don't have a dad.
Wow.
And so our missional community is just adopting them into the family. And so some of the kids are coming to live with people, or they're at practices. And now, because of the influence of the gospel in that place, the school actually has a Thursday afternoon chapel, a public school we get to go and preach the gospel, feed them dinner, and then they break them up into groups at tables and talk to them about Jesus every Thursday night. They go to the football games and cheer them on. They help clean up the jerseys. Their life is all around reaching that football team.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And
so my dad's helping with that because he's a sports guy.
It's great. He's still doing it.
He's still
ministering. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's cool because I know watching this, there's going to be guys that go, you know what? I thought I was ready to church plant, but I know nothing of ministry. If this is ministry, I need to learn this. We were talking about a friend of mine, David Achata, who came. He's interning with you now.
Right.
There are guys who are going to want to for lack of a better word, to study you.
Yeah.
To go train. I mean, how do you get involved with Soma?
Yeah. Well, wearesoma.com is the best place to start because it'll introduce you to some of the resources and first steps. There's a lot of online training that's available. Soma School is where we encourage people to start, especially if they're a church planner, because they can come live with us for a full week, get full immersion. They live with a missional community. They get training during the day, see experiences at night, and just kind of soak in. And what everybody always tells us after that week is they're like, one of the things that was greatest about this, first of all, they say it was all about Jesus, and we're always glad to hear that.
And there was good food.
And it was good food, and we had a lot of fun, all that stuff. But they said it's super non-impressive.
Yeah.
And they said, we don't want you to be offended by that. And I go, no, I'm not offended by that. And they go, what we mean by that is we aren't walking away going, oh my goodness, who could do this? No, we're walking away going, people can do this.
I love it.
Because they're with just normal people. So I'd say Soma School, we do Soma 1 days where we'll come into a city, do a 1-day training, just kind of an intro. It's really good for not only the leaders, but to bring your people to, because it gives them an exposure. So if someone's going, I got a core group, I really want them to understand what this might look like. It's a great training for them.
Amen.
So there's a lot of things like that. One thing I will say to church planters, this would be my warning, too many church planters.
I was going to ask you, what advice do you give the church planters?
I mean, too many church planters spend all their time trying to figure out how they're going to run a church service. And so then what they do is they're going, what kind of music we're going to have, and what kind of children's ministry, and what kind of building. And they spend all this time trying to figure out how to pull off an event. All they are is program directors.
Amen.
They're not church planners.
Amen.
And so then they learn how to put on a program. Lots of people show up, and they have no idea how to plan a church. Because now they have a whole bunch of people, but they don't know how to disciple them.
Amen.
And they don't have leaders to disciple them with. So now they're overwhelmed because it's all on their shoulders, and they get burned out. And that's why so many fail. And my recommendation is start by building a core group like a missional community. Teach them how to be disciple makers, make disciples, and let your church grow out of actually the mission of making disciples. Then gather them together if you want. That's great, but launch people, not a service.
It's so funny because I started church planning back in 2005 on accident, right? So we're at Saddleback, home of the Purpose-Driven Church. Mm-hmm. We were the accident-driven church, man. We had no clue what we were doing, and we started out of a Starbucks with a bunch of non-believers in the UK. Had no clue a church was going to come out of this, right? So I connected when you said, my missional community, we're a reading group going through Da Vinci Code, right? So we started, but it started as a group that moved into my living room talking about, had some Christians there, had some non-Christians there, and that became the way that I learned to train people, much like you guys. I just learned to take guys close like Jesus did. But what always fascinates me is that when I hear stuff like what you guys are doing, again, thinking internationally, thinking globally, other parts of the world, it's the only way
they don't have another option
to do it.
That's right.
Yeah, when you read the first century church, it was the only way to do it. When you go to China today, it's the only way to do it.
You don't have any other option, man. Yeah. You're going to get killed.
Doing stuff like this in other parts in Europe, you don't plant churches like you do it in your living room. You do it organically. It moves out. Missional community, same kind of thing, same kind of deal. So it's amazing to me, and especially the way America's going.
Yeah,
America.
We're going to have to figure this out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the problem is what we've been doing, and God's been gracious, and He's using all kinds of forms, but. The problem with some of what we've been doing is when you try to export what we've been doing into the mission field, you can't do it.
Yeah.
So many of our people that have been trained over here don't know what to do when they go over there.
Yeah.
Because they've never been taught how to make disciples in everyday life. They know how to do an event and then make them in that, but you can't do that. So then they're stuck.
When I first went to the mission field, I remember meeting guys on their way out. Oh, this is such a hard community, it's such a hard mission field. Good luck with that. And I remember at the time thinking, because my wife had been through perspectives at U.S. Center World Missions, I'm thinking, I don't want to be those guys. And I definitely don't want to bring my culturally attached Jesus and bring the whole, church structure. So I slotted into what they did, but what they did wasn't working. And it literally came out of the Holy Spirit doing his thing. And me being a spectator. Once I was a spectator, it worked, man. But
he's pretty good at doing that.
He is, yeah. It's been great watching you being a spectator. Thanks for sharing your life, not just with the people of Tacoma, but opening up your life to the rest of us. Like I said, letting us look over your shoulder. Thanks for letting us get a peek in this magazine. Thanks for having a passion for church planners and kicking it down and making it free, man. That shows you're really a church planner. That you kick all day. If you have not been to wearesoma.com, or is it .com and .org?
Yep.
Yeah, and did there used to be one?
You can also go to somatacoma.org, which has
Okay.
a lot of our resources that were developed out of Tacoma. But now we're a family of churches around the country and even now into the world. So that site's for the larger expression of our body.
And they've got like this hot little map that shows like all these little points on it that show where they are. But definitely go to the free downloads, because that's Jeff's heart, man. He wants to train this next generation of church planners. So go visit that. And anyways, Jeff, it's been an honor, man. Thanks.
It's great to be with you. Thanks.
All right.